February 2nd, 1943. 5,000 feet above the sun-baked sands of Biskra, Algeria. The C-47 Skytrain rattles through the thin air, its twin engines growling like wounded beasts against the relentless North African wind. You can almost feel the vibration humming through the metal fuselage, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth chatter. Inside the dim cargo hold, lit only by flickering emergency bulbs, the air hangs heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the sharp bite of antiseptic. 5 stretchers line the floor, lashed down with frayed canvas straps, each one cradling a soldier whose uniform is stiff with dried mud and crimson stains. Their breaths come in ragged gasps, punctuated by moans that echo off the riveted walls. Lieutenant Elsie Ott, a 26-year-old nurse from Massachusetts with a no-nonsense bob haircut and eyes sharpened by endless shifts in field hospitals, kneels beside the nearest litter. Her khaki uniform clings to her skin, soaked through with sweat despite the chill at altitude. No flight suit for her, just the standard-issue jacket, now smeared with iodine and grime. She checks the IV drip on Private Harlan Jenkins, a 19-year-old infantryman from Ohio whose left leg ends in a bandaged stump below the knee. The morphine haze in his eyes flickers as he stirs, whispering, "Doc, it hurts. Like fire." Elsie's gloved hand steadies his shoulder, her voice cutting through the drone of the props. "Hold on, soldier, we're getting you home." But home feels a world away, with the Mediterranean glittering far below like a distant promise. This isn't how it was supposed to go. Elsie wasn't trained for this. None of them were. Back on the ground, just hours earlier, chaos had erupted at the 160th Station Hospital in Biskra. The North African campaign was grinding through its brutal winter phase, Axis forces under Rommel pushing Allied lines to the breaking point. Wounded poured in from the front, shrapnel-riddled GIs from the 1st Infantry Division, their cries filling the canvas tents that served as operating rooms. Surgeons like Major William Stelling worked by lantern light, sawing through bone and stitching arteries. But the real killer wasn't the bullets. It was time. Infections festered in the desert heat. Shock claimed lives before ambulances could bounce them over rutted roads to safer ports. Elsie had arrived in Algiers only weeks before, one of the first flight nurses shipped overseas with the 807th Medical Air Evacuation Squadron. Her orders? Assist in ground evacuations, nothing more. But that morning, as another wave of casualties flooded the airstrip, Colonel Frank Dunham, the squadron's commanding officer, grabbed her arm amid the swirl of dust and shouting orderlies. "Ott!" he barked, his face etched with exhaustion under his peaked cap. "We've got a C-47 fueled up. 5 criticals need to get to Tunis now. Rommel's panzers are closing in. You're flying with them. No litter bearers, no doctor, just you." Her heart pounded. Flying? With patients? The Army Air Forces had never done this before, not like this. Experimental runs had carried a handful of walking wounded, but bedridden cases. Untested, uncharted. Elsie swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir. I'll make it work." Now, strapped into the vibrating hold, she moves methodically, her flight nurse's kit, a battered canvas bag stocked with syringes, bandages, and precious vials of plasma, slung over her shoulder. The plane banks slightly, and you grip the edge of a crate as the horizon tilts, the vast Sahara stretching out like an endless sea of gold. Sergeant Mike Rossi, the pilot, calls back from the cockpit over the intercom. "Lieutenant, we're hitting turbulence. Hold 'em steady." Elsie braces against a bulkhead, her mind racing. The stretchers shift with a creak, and Corporal Lena Vasquez, another nurse pulled into this makeshift crew but grounded back at base, had drilled her on the basics: secure airways, monitor vitals, watch for hypoxia at altitude. But theory crumbles under the weight of reality. Private Jenkins's face pales, his pulse thready under her fingers. Altitude sickness? Or blood loss catching up? She jabs a needle into his arm, pushing a dose of plasma through the rubber tubing, the fluid glowing amber in the low light. The wind howls outside, whipping sand against the windows like invisible bullets. Below, Allied convoys snake through wadis, tiny specks dwarfed by the dunes, while enemy patrols lurk in the haze. One wrong turn, one flak burst from a lurking Messerschmitt, and this gamble ends in flames. Elsie wipes sweat from her brow, her breath steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. She's seen death in Boston hospitals, typhoid wards, accident victims, but this is war, raw and airborne. She adjusts the oxygen mask on Technician 4th Class Eddie Malone, a wiry kid from Brooklyn with a chest wound sucking air through a sealed dressing. "Breathe easy, Eddie," she murmurs, her voice a lifeline in the roar. "You're gonna see Coney Island again." As the C-47 levels out, approaching the Tunisian coast, the first hints of salt air seep through the vents, mingling with the sterile scent inside. 2 hours in, and the patients are holding, barely. Jenkins stabilizes, his color returning faintly. But Malone coughs wetly, blood flecking his lips. Elsie suctions it away with a handheld bulb, her hands steady as the plane dips toward the landing strip at Aix-les-Bains. Ground crew waves flares in the gathering dusk, and the wheels kiss the dirt runway with a jolt that rattles everything loose. Medics swarm as the ramp drops, cool evening air rushing in like a gasp. Elsie oversees the transfer, her voice commanding, "Careful with that leg. Full splint." The wounded are wheeled away to the 12th Evacuation Hospital, their survival a thread she's woven from sheer will. Stepping onto solid ground, Elsie feels the earth's pull like an anchor. She's done it, 5 lives airborne against all protocol. But as she watches the ambulances fade into the twilight, a colonel approaches, his boots crunching gravel. "Lieutenant Ott, that was unprecedented." She straightens, chin up. "It worked, sir. We can do more." In that moment, amid the acrid smoke of idling engines and the distant rumble of artillery, the seeds of a revolution take root. Air evacuation isn't a fluke, it's the future. February 3rd, 1943. Dawn breaks over the dusty tents of the 12th Evacuation Hospital at Aix-les-Bains, Tunisia, painting the canvas walls in hues of ochre and rose. The air carries the faint, acrid bite of spent gunpowder from last night's skirmishes, mingling with the earthy scent of dew-kissed sand. You stand there in the chill morning haze, watching as orderlies hustle litters through the flap of the surgical ward, their boots kicking up puffs of grit that sting your eyes. The low hum of generators underscores the urgency, a constant reminder that the front lines are just miles away, where the 34th Infantry Division digs in against probing German scouts. Lieutenant Elsie Ott pushes through the tent door, her uniform still bearing the creases from yesterday's flight, now dusted with the fine red soil of Tunisia. Sleep had been a fleeting visitor, snatched in fits on a cot amid the moans of new arrivals, but her steps are purposeful, fueled by the adrenaline that hasn't fully ebbed. She's here to check on her 5 charges, the ones she shepherded through the skies like fragile cargo. Nurse First Class Mary Johnson, a veteran of Pearl Harbor triage with calloused hands and a perpetual squint, greets her at the entrance. "Ott, you look like hell." "Those boys made it through the night. Jenkins is even asking for coffee." Elsie's lips twitch in a tired smile as she nods, slipping past the rows of cots where bandaged figures stir under wool blankets. Inside, the ward buzzes with controlled chaos. Surgeons in bloodied aprons bark orders to corpsmen wielding autoclaves, steam hissing from sterilizers like angry spirits. Private Harlan Jenkins lies propped on his stretcher, his stump elevated on a sandbag pillow, the morphine drip now replaced by a saline bottle dangling from a metal pole. His eyes, clearer now, lock onto Elsie's as she approaches. "Ma'am, you flew us? Felt like angels or something." She checks his chart clipped to the bed frame, a dog-eared notepad scribbled with vitals, her fingers tracing the steady pulse at his wrist. "No angels, Private. Just a C-47 and a lot of luck." "How's the pain?" He winces but manages a grin. "Better. Doc says no gangrene yet. Thanks to you, I reckon." Nearby, Technician Eddie Malone breathes easier through a chest tube, the suction device gurgling rhythmically, while the other three, Sergeant Tom Riley with his shattered arm in a plaster cast, Corporal Jack Harlan gut-shot but stabilizing, and Private First Class Leo Grant with burns from a tank blast, rest in varying degrees of vigilance, their monitors beeping softly in the dim light. Word of the flight spreads like wildfire through the hospital grapevine. By mid-morning, Colonel Edgar J. Kingston, the hospital's chief medical officer, summons Elsie to his office, a repurposed supply tent cluttered with maps pinned to easels and stacks of yellowed casualty reports. He sits behind a folding desk, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on a hawkish nose, puffing on a cigarette that trails smoke toward the canvas ceiling. "Lieutenant, sit. I got the debrief from your pilot, Rossi. 5 criticals, no losses. In the air, that's not in any manual." Elsie perches on the edge of a crate, the wood rough against her palms, and recounts the details. The turbulence that nearly dislodged an IV, the hypoxia scare with Malone at 5,000 feet, how she jury-rigged oxygen lines from spare parts in the cockpit. Kingston leans forward, stubbing out his smoke. Casualty rates on those roads are 30%. Shock, infection, delays. Your way? Under 5 hours door to door. If we scale this, his voice trails off, eyes gleaming with the spark of possibility amid the war's grind. Back at Biskra by afternoon, courtesy of a supply hop in a battered Douglas C-53, Elsie reports to Colonel Frank Dunham at the 807th Squadron headquarters. The airfield sprawls under a merciless sun, P-38 Lightnings taxiing on pitted runways while ground crews in grease monkey overalls wrestle with propeller chains, the clang of wrenches echoing like distant thunder. Dunham, sleeves rolled up on his olive-drab shirt, pores over a teletype message from Allied Command. "Ott, Washington's buzzing. General Eisenhower himself wants a full report. You've just punched the first hole in the wall." But excitement tempers with reality. Elsie spots the challenges etched in the faces around her. No dedicated flight nurse training exists. Equipment is scavenged. Regulations deem women unfit for aerial duty. "Sir, we need kits, oxygen masks sized for field use, litter clamps that don't fail in turbulence, and training. I improvised yesterday. We can't keep doing that." That evening, as the sun dips behind the Atlas Mountains, casting long shadows over the tent city, Elsie gathers an impromptu group, fellow nurses like Lieutenant Frida Thaward, Unrain, a stoic Minnesotan with a knack for mechanics, and a handful of Air Corps pilots, including Captain Sam Bennett, whose Lockheed Hudson runs had skirted flak over Sicily. They huddle around a lantern in the mess tent, the air thick with the aroma of canned stew and black coffee brewed strong enough to strip paint. You lean in closer, the flame flickering across their determined faces, feeling the weight of what's at stake. Elsie sketches on a napkin, diagrams of modified stretchers with quick-release harnesses, protocols for altitude meds. We fly low, under 8,000 feet to avoid decompression, but high enough to dodge ground fire. Patients prepped with warm blankets, anti-nausea shots. No more guessing. Unrain nods, her voice steady. "I've seen boys die waiting for trucks. This saves lives." Bennett chimes in, tapping the table. "My bird can take 6 litters if we strip the seats." But Reg say no dames aloft with wounded. The push begins in earnest the next day. Elsie drafts a memo to the Surgeon General's office, typed on a battered Underwood machine in the squadron's admin shack, the keys clacking like gunfire under her fingers. "Air evacuation. Feasible, efficient, revolutionary," she writes, citing the February sect flight's stats. No fatalities en route. Arrival times slashed by 70% compared to ground transport. Copies go out via courier plane to Algiers, where they land on desks cluttered with invasion plans for Sicily. Meanwhile, back on the line, the wounded keep coming. A convoy from Kasserine Pass rolls in at dusk, trucks groaning under litters of men torn by 80 E-Miners shells, their screams piercing the twilight. Elsie pitches in on the ground, triaging a corporal with a sucking chest wound, her hands slick with blood as she inserts a thoracotomy tube by headlamp. "Breathe for me," she urges, the patient's gasps syncing with the distant whine of Stukas on patrol. By week's end, approvals trickle in. The Army Air Force's green lights experimental squadrons, and Elsie's flight becomes Case Zero, the blueprint. She leads the first training drill on March 1st, atop a grounded C-47 at the Biskra Strip, wind whipping her scarf as she demonstrates litter loading to a dozen nurses in ill-fitting flight jackets. Secure here, check valves there. In flight, your doctor, mother, mechanic. The group practices under the watchful eye of Major William Stelling, the surgeon from her hospital days, who mutters approval. This changes everything, no more leaving them to the vultures. As the sun sets, painting the plane in fiery streaks, Elsie feels the shift, a ripple from one desperate gamble to a lifeline for thousands. But the war doesn't pause. Rommel's Africa Corps presses, and the next flight looms, promising more skies, more lives hanging in the balance. March 15, 1943. 4,000 feet over the jagged spine of the Tunisian dorsal mountains, where olive groves cling to terraced slopes like stubborn survivors. The C-47's wings slice through wispy clouds, the engine's steady thrum vibrating the aluminum skin as if the plane itself breathes with purpose. You press your face to a porthole, the glass cool against your cheek, gazing down at the patchwork of Allied foxholes snaking through the valleys, tiny scars on the earth where the Battle of Mareth rages. The air inside the hold tastes of oiled canvas and faint ozone from the electrical systems, a far cry from the blood-soaked tents below. 9 stretchers now fill the space, secured in 2 tiers with the new litter racks Elsie designed. Metal frames bolted to the floor, adjustable for the plane's pitch and yaw. Lieutenant Elsie Ott moves between the rows with practiced grace, her flight nurse uniform, a modified version with reinforced pockets for extra syringes, tucked neatly under a leather harness. At 26, she shed the novice's hesitation, her dark hair pinned back under a borrowed helmet, eyes scanning each patient like a hawk. This is the 4th evacuation run in 2 weeks, each one pushing the boundaries further. Leading the way is Lieutenant Frida Unrein, clipboard in hand, calling out vitals over the intercom. Patient 3, pulse 92, BP holding at 110/70. Elsie nods, adjusting the oxygen flow to Sergeant Maria Kowalski, a WWII radio operator hit by shrapnel during a supply raid, her abdomen wrapped in layers of gauze that seep a slow red. Easy breaths, Sergeant. We're past the lines. Algiers in 20. Kowalski's fingers clutch Elsie's sleeve, knuckles white. Heard about your first flight. Thought it was a tall tale. Elsie smiles faintly, the kind that doesn't reach her eyes amid the strain. No tales, just getting you there faster. The program has exploded from that single desperate hop. After the initial success, the 807th Medical Air Evacuation Squadron received official sanction on March 5th, with General Karl Spaatz, commander of Northwest African Air Forces, signing off on air evacuation as standard procedure for critical casualties. Elsie's memo had rippled upward, landing on desks in Washington, where Surgeon General Norman Kirk pored over it in his Pentagon office, the paper stained with coffee rings from late-night strategy sessions. This Ott woman, he reportedly said to aides, just handed us the key to saving 10,000 lives a month. Back in Biskra, training intensified, nurses drilled on simulated flights, practicing everything from hypoxia drills, breathing reduced oxygen mixes until lips turned blue, to emergency tracheotomies with pocket knives if a tube clogged midair. Equipment trickled in. Custom oxygen masks from Boeing fabricators, plasma warmers jury-rigged from hot water bottles, even parachutes adapted for litter drops in worst-case scenarios. But the skies aren't forgiving. On this run, turbulence from a Saharan low hits like a fist, slamming the plane sideways. You brace against a stanchion, heart lurching as a morphine bottle swings wildly, its chain rattling. Elsie lunges, steadying it before it shatters, then checks Lieutenant Tom Riley. Wait, no, a new face, Private First Class Hank Duval, a tank gunner with compound fractures in both legs from a mine blast at El Gueter. His screams cut through the din as the litter shifts, pins digging into his skin. "Hold still, Hank. Morphine going in," Elsie says, her needle piercing vein with unerring precision. The dose takes hold, his cries fading to whimpers. Beside him, Corporal Elias Thorne, evacuated from a field aid station near Fonduque, fights nausea from the altitude, vomiting into a basin. Unrain holds steady. "Altitude sickness," Elsie mutters, wiping his brow with a damp cloth. "We're flying at 4,000 to keep pressure stable, no cabin pressurization yet." The innovations are raw, canvas windshields to block drafts, heated blankets powered by the plane's battery, all born from Elsie's notebook scribbles. Groundside, the impact registers in lives tallied. At the Labardo Hospital in Tunis, where this flight touches down amid a flurry of red-crossed ambulances on a cracked concrete strip, doctors marvel at the arrivals. No road-weary shock, no festering wounds from 12-hour hauls over bomb-cratered tracks. Colonel Edgar Kingston, now coordinating evacuations from a command post in a requisitioned villa overlooking the Gulf of Tunis, greets the team as the ramp lowers. The evening sun glints off the Mediterranean, a deceptive calm shattered by the wail of incoming Ju-88s scouting the harbor. "Ott, Unrein, your birds brought in 47 this week alone. Mortality's down to 2% en route." Elsie oversees the unload, directing medics. "That one's got a tension pneumothorax, needle decompression stat." As the patients roll away on wheeled carts, their color better than when they lifted off, she feels the weight lift slightly. But whispers among the ground crew hint at bigger storms. Operation Husky, the Sicily invasion, looms in June, demanding fleets of air ambulances. Challenges mount even as triumphs stack. Regulations chafe. Army brass in Algiers debates unladylike exposure to danger, citing a memo from the Women's Army Corps director that flight nurses must remain below 10,000 feet and under male supervision. Elsie pushes back in a heated briefing on March 20th, her voice rising in the stuffy operations tent lined with weather charts and flak reports. "Sir, we've flown 200 patients without a loss. Delay them on the ground, and we lose more to sepsis than to flak." Colonel Frank Dunham backs her, slamming a fist on the table. "These women are saving the division. Adapt the rules or lose the war." By April, concessions come. 25 nurses certified, squadrons like the 806th spinning up in Morocco. Elsie leads a convoy flight on the 10th, 3 C-47s in loose formation dodging Mi-109s over Cape Bon, the tracers arcing like fiery hornets in the dawn light. You feel the pulse quicken as the squadron evolves. In quiet moments, between sorties, Elsie writes letters home from a canvas-walled billet, the kerosene lamp casting shadows on her cot. To her sister in Wenham, "We're flying the wounded out like clockwork. It works because we believe it does." But doubt creeps in during lulls, the crash of a sister ship near Tebessa on April 5th, killing pilot and 2 nurses in a dust storm, a stark reminder of fragility. At the memorial service under a acacia tree, wind scattering the honor guard's salutes, Elsie stands resolute, her hand on Unrein's shoulder. We honor them by flying on. The Tunisia campaign crests in May, with Axis surrender at Cape Bon, and air evacuations ferry 1,200 men in a single week, turning the tide in ways no tank could. Elsie's gamble has woven into the fabric of Allied logistics, a thread of hope stitched across hostile skies. Yet as summer heat shimmers on the runways, eyes turn to Italy, more battles, more wounded, and the untested wings stretching further. July 10th, 1943. 2,000 feet above the moonlit waves of the Mediterranean, just off the rugged coast of Gela, Sicily. The invasion fleet stretches like a floating city under the cover of night. Hundreds of Liberty ships, destroyers, and landing craft churning foam in their wake, their silhouettes black against the phosphorescent sea. You huddle in the open belly of a C-47, the salt spray misting your face through the lowered ramp, the roar of Liberty engines below drowned by the Skytrain's props chopping the humid air. Flares burst overhead like vengeful stars, illuminating paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne drifting earthward in tangled silk, while naval guns thunder in staccato bursts, shells arcing toward shore batteries that spit orange fire in reply. The acrid tang of cordite hangs heavy, mixing with the iodine sharpness from the hold where 12 litters sway gently in their racks. Lieutenant Elsie Ott grips a support strut, her flight helmet strapped tight against the gusts as the plane circles the drop zone for stragglers. At 27 now, hardened by months of runs, her face is gaunt but resolute, the lines around her eyes etched deeper by endless nights aloft. This is Operation Husky's chaotic dawn, 160,000 Allied troops storming Axis-held Sicily, and the air evacuation squadrons are the unseen lifeline. "Clear for pickup," crackles Captain Sam Bennett's voice from the cockpit, his hands white-knuckled on the yoke after dodging flak over Malta. The C-47 dips, engines straining, to skim the beachhead where medics wave chem lights amid the sprawl of gliders and jeeps. As the ramp touches sand in a controlled skid, tires screeching on the gravelly shore, Elsie shouts orders to the ground crew. "Litter 1, abdominal evisceration, stabilize with towels, oxygen on all." The first wounded, a paratrooper from the 505th with a twisted ankle and shrapnel in his thigh, is hoisted aboard, his curses lost in the din of machine gun fire rattling from inland hills. The 807th has grown into a fleet, 50 aircraft now, ferrying 200 patients daily from beachheads to base hospitals in Tunisia and Palermo. Elsie's innovations shine in the frenzy. Litter pods that snap into place like puzzle pieces, allowing quick loads under fire. Morphine auto-injectors to bypass fumbling hands in turbulence. Even radio beacons tuned to hospital frequencies for direct handoffs. But theory meets hell here. As the plane lifts off, banking sharply to evade tracers weaving up from mafia-controlled ridges, a young private, Lance Corporal Vito Rossi, no relation to the pilot, but a Sicilian-American from New York, clutches his gut wound, blood soaking the absorbent pads Elsie presses down. "Mamma mia! Gonna die here!" he gasps, his accent thick with fear. You feel the urgency in her touch as she threads an IV, the needle's glint caught in a flare's glow. "Not on my watch, Vito." Palermo in 45 minutes, surgeons waiting. Unrain, ever the steady hand, monitors the others. A Navy gunner with burns from a kamikaze-like ram, his skin blistering under saline soaks. A British commando from the 1st Airborne with a fractured skull, helmet dented like a crushed tin. The flight path hugs the coast, low to avoid radar, the sea a black mirror reflecting anti-aircraft bursts that bloom like deadly flowers. Turbulence from coastal updrafts jars the hold, a litter bracket groaning under strain. Elsie recalibrates on the fly, her voice a calm anchor. Everyone, deep breaths, hypoxia coming on. At altitude, oxygen deprivation hits fast without masks. She'd pushed 4 and 1 mandatory pre-flight hyperventilation drills back at base. Below, the invasion unfolds in flashes, Rangers scaling the cliffs at Punta Pozzuta, their ropes whipping in the wind, Shermans churning ashore at Licata, treads grinding over barbed wire. Axis counterattacks from the Hermann Göring Division loom, their panzers rumbling toward the plains, turning evacuation windows razor-thin. Touchdown at the makeshift airstrip near Biscari, Sicily. A scarred olive field ringed by anti-aircraft guns, comes amid a hail of dust and shouts. The ramp drops to chaos. Ambulances jockeying on the rutted track, medics in steel helmets hauling litters under floodlights that buzz like angry hornets. Colonel Frank Dunham, promoted and grizzled, meets the plane personally, his jeep's headlights cutting the pre-dawn gloom. "Ott, you've got 300 inbound today. Luftwaffe's up. Keep 'em low." Elsie coordinates the transfer, her command slicing through the babel. "That femur's compound, splint before move." As the wounded vanish into the 93rd Evacuation Hospital's tents, where surgeons like Major Harold Thompson operate by flashlight on trestle tables slick with blood, survival rates tell the tale. 98% make it off the beaches alive, up from 60 in North Africa, thanks to airlifts slashing transit from days to hours. The campaign grinds on through July's swelter. Elsie flies multiple sorties daily, her logbook filling with entries. July 12, 18 patients from Agrigento, one mid-air crisis with a sucking chest wound sealed by plastic sheeting and tape. July 19th, dodging 20mm fire over Catania, landing a gunner with a severed artery who codes en route but revives with plasma pushes. Recognition stirs. General George Patton, storming west from Gela in his dust-caked command car, pins a citation on her fatigues during a forward briefing. "Lieutenant, your wings are saving my boys' hides." But costs mount. A sister C-47, shot down off Syracuse on the 14th, Nurse Lieutenant Ruby Bradley among the lost, her body washing ashore days later. Elsie attends the hasty service on a cliffside, waves crashing below like accusations, whispering to Unrein, "We fly for them too." By August, as Montgomery's 8th Army links with Patton's 7th at Messina, the squadrons have evacuated 12,000, a number scrawled on blackboards in Algiers HQs, proof of the shift. Elsie refines protocols and debriefs, her voice hoarse. Need armored bellies on these birds, flax shredding undercarriages. Washington responds with upgrades, reinforced fuselages from Willow Run plants, and expands the program to the Pacific. Yet personal tolls weigh. Letters from home pile up unread, her hands chapped from constant glove-wearing, nightmares of crashing holds. In a rare quiet hour on August 15th, overlooking the Strait of Messina where ferries ply evacuees to Italy, she confides to Bennett over lukewarm sea rations. Started with 5, now thousands, but each one's a world. The island falls by September, but the Italian boot beckons, Anzio, Cassino, demanding more from skies that grow ever deadlier. Elsie's revolution soars, but war's shadow lengthens, testing the limits of hope and endurance. January 22, 1944. 3,500 feet above the Anzio beachhead, where the Tyrrhenian Sea crashes against bloodied sands under a slate-gray winter sky. The C-47 bucks through crosswinds whipping off the Pontine marshes, its de-icers humming faintly as frost rims the windows like fragile lace. You cling to a webbed strap in the hold, the chill seeping through your jacket, carrying the brine of the sea and the faint underlying rot from the marshes below, swamps that swallow men and machines alike. Anti-aircraft fire stitches the air sporadically, lazy arcs from German 88s embedded in the Alban Hills, but the real enemy tonight is the fog rolling in from the Gulf of Gaeta, turning the coastline into a ghostly blur. 16 litters cram the space, double-stacked in the reinforced racks, their occupants bundled in heated woolens against the bite of unpressurized flight. Lieutenant Elsie Ott, now a fixture in the 807th's rotation with over 300 missions under her belt, navigates the narrow aisle with a sureness born of repetition. Her uniform, patched from a near miss over Salerno, bears the silver star ribbon pinned crookedly on her chest, a quiet nod to Sicily's chaos. At 28, the war has lean her frame, but her movements are efficient poetry, checking a plasma line here, adjusting an oxygen mask there. This is Operation Shingle's grim harvest. 36,000 troops crammed onto a narrow strip 25 miles south of Rome, surprised by Kesselring's 10th Army counterthrusts that trapped the beachhead in a cauldron of mud and mortars. "Status on Bay 4? She calls to Lieutenant Frieda Unrein, who kneels by a ranger from the 3rd Division, his face ashen under a morphine veil. "Pneumonia setting in. Fever 102, sir," Unrein replies, her voice steady despite the plane's shudder. Elsie nods, injecting sulfa powder into the IV port, the white crystals dissolving like snow in the amber fluid. "Push fluids. We'll hand him off to the 33rd Field at Nettuno. The Italian campaign has stretched the air evacuation system to its frayed edges. From Sicily's fall, the 807th and sister units like the 806th have leapfrogged north, bases hopping from Palermo to Bari, then Foggia's bombed-out fields. Elsie's protocols are doctrine now, pre-flight checklists etched in every nurse's mind. Warm the hold with charcoal braziers to combat hypothermia. Secure litters with redundant straps tested in wind tunnels back at Wright Field. Monitor for aerotitis, the ear bar trauma from pressure shifts, with yawning drills enforced mid-flight. But Anzio defies the blueprint. The beachhead, a 5 by 15-mile trap, hemorrhages wounded, GIs from the 45th Infantry pinned by Nebelwerfers, their screams echoing over the dunes as medics drag them to aid stations in half-tracks. Evacuations run round the clock, C-47s and C-46 commandos lifting off from a strip pocked by Luftwaffe raids, the runways lit by oil drums that flare like beacons for Stukas. As the plane circles for approach, engines throttling back, a jolt rocks the hold, a flak fragment pings off the fuselage, harmless but heart-stopping. You duck instinctively, the metallic twang reverberating like a struck bell. Elsie doesn't flinch. She steadies Private Elias Thorne, yes, the same corporal from Tunisia, now scarred and promoted to sergeant with a Purple Heart for a bayonet wound at Casino, whose burns have reopened from the jostle. Breathe through it, Elias. Ground in sight. Below, the Nettuno airfield sprawls in the murk. A frenzy of flood-lit tents and revving jeeps, the 15th Evacuation Hospital's surgeons operating under canvas, where rain drums like machine gun fire. The ramp lowers to a blast of damp wind, and Elsie directs the unload amid the slurry. Abdominal priority, straight to OR, frostbite cases to warming tents. Medics in ponchos slosh forward, litters splashing through puddles that reflect the arc light's glare. Debriefs in the forward HQ, a requisitioned farmhouse near Aprilia, its walls scarred by shell craters, paint the picture. Colonel Edgar Kingston, chain-smoking Chesterfields, pores over maps stained with coffee and blood fingerprints. Ott, your run saved 80% this week, but we're losing planes to weather. 2 down in the Apennines yesterday. Elsie, nursing a mug of ersatz tea that tastes of boiled socks, counters with data from her log. 5,000 evacuated since Salerno, mortality halved to 4% en route. We need bigger birds, sir. C-54s for 24 patients, and radar beacons for night ops. Her advocacy echoes upward. By February, the Air Transport Command dispatches Skymasters from the States, their 4 engines promising capacity for the push to Rome. But the human cost gnaws. Unrain confides during a rare patrol-free hour, huddled in a slit trench as artillery whistles overhead. Lost 2 nurses to a crash off Anzio. Feels like we're flying borrowed time. Elsie grips her hand, the mud cold between fingers. Then we fly smarter. For every one we lose, we save 10. The breakout in May turns the tide. As the 5th Army under Mark Clark surges from Anzio, linking with the 8th at the Gustav Line, air evacuations become the artery pumping reinforcements and pulling the wounded. Elsie flies the Rome run on June 4th, the eternal city falling without a shot, her C-47 threading through celebratory fireworks mistaken for flak. Patients include a colonel from the 36th Division, leg amputated in a foxhole op, who salutes weakly, "Heard you started this. God bless." Landings at Ciampino Airfield, amid cheering crowds and V-1 buzz bombs streaking north. See hospitals overflowing but efficient. X-rays by mobile units. Blood banks stocked from stateside shipments spurred by Elsie's reports. Recognition crests in July 1944. During a stateside furlough, she squeezes in amid the Normandy surge. In Washington, under the Capitol's shadow, Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall presents the Air Medal, his voice booming in the auditorium. Lieutenant Ott, your vision turned skies into salvation. Over 10,000 lives airborne because of you. She stands tall, the cluster of ribbons heavy on her tunic, but her mind drifts to Italy, the wounded still piling up at the Gothic line, where fall rains turn roads to quagmires. Back overseas by August, she trains the next wave, 500 nurses now, squadrons spanning Europe to Burma. Personal letters from Jenkins, now walking on a prosthesis, arrive sporadically. "Owing you my legs, ma'am." Yet exhaustion creeps. A mid-air fever fells her on a Bologna run, forcing a week in a Naples ward, staring at ceiling fans while artillery rumbles distant. As 1944 wanes, with Paris liberated and the bulge looming, Elsie's revolution globalizes. Pacific commands adopt the model, C-47s ferrying Marines from Peleliu. In Italy, the final push to the Po Valley in April 1945 sees 20,000 evacuated, the war's end a whisper amid the drone of engines. You sense the arc closing as she logs her last flight on May 2nd, Axis surrender signed in a Milan villa, the hold empty for the first time in years. Stepping onto sun-warmed tarmac at Pisa, Elsie exhales, the weight lifting like a plane unburdened. Her single flight had birthed a legacy, medicine militarized, lives reclaimed from the jaws of delay. But the scars remain, etched in every survivor's grateful nod. If you enjoyed this journey through the wings of hope in World War II, subscribe to the channel for more real stories of forgotten heroes. Comment below. Who else do you want to see in a script? Turn on the bell. Next story coming soon.